They built the Great Pyramid in roughly 20 years. 2 million blocks. No cranes, no engines, and a finished monument that still makes modern engineers wince. That should sound impossible. It did the first time I actually sat down and read the excavation reports and experimental papers. And the explanations are stranger and more human than any myth. Today I'll show you 3 real reasons the pyramids went up so fast. A predictable, organized workforce. Simple but powerful hauling and material tricks. And ruthless, state-level logistics. No aliens. No made-up miracles. Just evidence, experiments, and a clearer picture of how people organized massive effort long before industrial machines. Stay with me, because each part of the explanation depends on the other two. Remove one, and the whole timeline stretches out. Imagine standing at the edge of the construction camp, not as a tourist, but as an observer of systems. You wouldn't see chaos. You'd see rows of houses, long ovens, piles of pottery, and tools neatly stored. Archaeologists found those settlements. They call one of them the workman's village. It contains bakeries large enough to feed thousands, butcher areas, bed spaces, and even medical equipment. That physical footprint is our first clue. These weren't anonymous mobs. They were organized teams. Here's a surprising fact. The labor force was predictable. The Nile floods created a farming calendar. Each year, fields flooded and farmers had a season where work in the fields was impossible. The state exploited that cycle. Instead of relying on random conscription, the pharaoh's administration mobilized seasonal labor. Farmers who left their fields for a promised period of state work. That seasonal rhythm made labor a scheduled resource, not a chaotic variable. Why does predictability matter? Because predictability allows parallel work. If you can count on 10,000 people arriving in July, you can schedule stone cutting, hauling, and placement simultaneously across multiple fronts. Specialization follows. Teams form who always quarried, always hauled, always dressed stones. Pottery shards and graffiti from the camps actually name teams and leaders. That's not the record of enslaved, faceless workers. That's the record of organized crews. Now think about what organization buys you in construction terms. If a small team shows up each season and knows their role like a factory line, work rates rise. Training reduces mistakes. Supply bottlenecks shrink. And injuries, common in heavy work, get treated quickly so workers can return sooner. Examined skeletons from worker cemeteries show healed fractures and evidence of care, which suggests the state invested in keeping the labor force functional. So the first engine of speed is social. Scheduled people, trained teams, predictable manpower. But even trained people need tools and tricks. That's the second reason. Physics and engineering shortcuts that drastically reduce effort. There's a famous experiment you should know about. Archaeologists and physicists recreated hauling a heavy statue on a wooden sledge over sand. With dry sand, the force required is enormous. With the sand in front of the sledge lightly wetted, friction drops significantly. The visual is simple. Water forms tiny bridges between sand grains, increasing stiffness under load and reducing the drag force on the sledge. Lab tests and reconstructions showed hauling effort can be cut in half with the right wetting technique. Ancient Egyptian wall paintings even depict figures pouring liquid in front of sleds. That isn't decorative detail. It's a practical description of an ancient physics trick. Combine that with river transport and the equation changes again. The Nile is the planet's original supply chain. Quarrying was planned where stones could be shipped by barge during high water. Heavy granite from Aswan wasn't marched by land for hundreds of miles. It was floated. Limestone for casing stones often came from quarries close to the river, so barges could deliver directly to the build site. So you get a staged pipeline. Quarry sled to riverbank using wet sand technique, barge downstream, short haul to placement area. Flow beats stop-start hauling. Flow scales. There's also a debated idea worth mentioning because it could shift time estimates if proven more widely true. Some researchers propose that certain blocks were not carved in the quarry and hauled whole, but rather produced on-site by pouring a limestone-based mix into molds, an ancient kind of cast stone. Joseph Davidovits championed this geopolymer hypothesis, and lab work shows it's chemically plausible. The mainstream remains cautious because tool marks and petrographic analyses support carved stone for many blocks. The safe takeaway: whether carved or partially cast, the role of on-site techniques that reduce hauling and finishing time matters. Even if only a subset of blocks use such methods, the cumulative time saved would be substantial. Okay, workforce plus physics. But you still need the money, the boats, the ovens, and the administration to pull these pieces together. That's the third reason: logistics and project management at a state scale. Imagine a modern construction site on steroids. Bakeries baking thousands of loaves a day, workshops producing chisels and copper tools, teams assigned to sectors of the pyramid, and storehouses keeping spare ropes and sled runners. Archaeologists found oven floors big enough for mass bread making, animal bones in dumps that indicate large-scale provisioning, and tool scatters that point to on-site production. Treat the whole operation as a supply chain problem, and suddenly the idea of finishing a massive structure in 2 decades becomes less mystical. One of the toughest logistical challenges was vertical placement. How do you lift blocks hundreds of feet? Scholars debate ramps, long external ramps, zigzag ramps, spirals, and Jean-Pierre Houdin's internal ramp hypothesis. Houdin suggests the Egyptians built an internal spiral ramp within the pyramid structure to haul blocks up incrementally. Modern scans and the geometry of certain voids lend some plausibility to internal passages. External ramp models require enormous material investments that themselves would be a massive project. We don't have a smoking gun ramp preserved, but the combination of ramp strategies, levering systems, and highly coordinated placement teams explains precise placement without modern cranes. To make this concrete, picture a day in that system. A quarry crew cuts blocks to rough size. A river team marshals barges for the next high water window. A hauling crew waits with sledges. Another team handles the temporary placement and dressing of the casing stones. Medical attendants mend a sprain. A baker slides loaves out of an oven. And the overseer checks a tally of who worked which day. That orchestration, people, tools, transport, and food, is a complex machine in which human reliability and administrative reach are the power source. Now let's pull the threads together with an example that highlights how these 3 forces interact. Consider a heavy granite capstone or a specially dressed casing stone. The granite might come from Aswan, sent downriver on barges. On arrival, the block is hauled via wet sand sled for the short overland gap. Specialized teams lift and lever with short internal ramps or temporary wooden platforms. Meanwhile, the nearby camp supplies bread and water, and medical staff stand ready. If any one of these elements falters, crews are unpaid and leave. The river doesn't flood, or tools fail, work slows. When all these elements run on schedule, however, placement happens quickly and consistently. Multiply that daily and the 20-year timeline resolves into a plan, not a miracle. You may still wonder, if this is so organized, why do popular narratives still talk about slave gangs or alien help? 2 reasons: drama sells, and the truth includes coercion and inequality. Pharaonic projects had political force behind them. The point is not to sanitize history. The state had power. But the archaeological evidence pushes us away from the idea of a chaotic, anonymous mob and toward a picture of organized labor treated as a critical resource. That distinction explains speed. Before we close, here are 3 crisp takeaways. First, predictable seasonal labor, organized into skilled crews, provided the human horsepower, and predictability is what turns effort into scheduling. Second, simple scientific tricks like wetting sand and smart river transport massively reduced hauling labor per block. Third, logistics, bakeries, workshops, tool supplies, and administrative coordination multiplied the effect. Alone, each factor helps. Together, they create industrial-scale performance in a pre-industrial world. If you want a sharp number to hold on to, roughly 2 to 3 million blocks placed in about 20 years. That's not a tribute to brute force alone. It's a tribute to system design, humans organizing humans with food, boats, ramps, and physics working together. It's less magic and more machine, a human machine. If this evidence-first take on the pyramid surprised you, I put the key excavation reports, experimental papers on hauling, and the main ramp and geopolymer studies in the description. Check them out if you want to dig deeper. And before you go, tell me in the comments which theory surprised you most, workforce, wet sand physics, or internal ramp models, and why in one sentence. I'll pin the best answers and make a short highlighting the top replies. If you like this, subscribe for more history explained with primary sources and experiments. Share this with someone who thinks the pyramids are impossible. The real explanation is even better. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next deep dive.